conversation.
Yeah, almost one of our first ones. And he went on to say that, and I guess this does kind of tie into Jordan Peterson, because I've been thinking a lot about why is it that like why is he resonating with so many people? Like why is it like when I started this, I kind of wanted it to be like that, and I was like, I'm not hitting the note that he's hitting. And I'm like, oh, that's because he's literally bringing the Bible to like a whole new generation of people who haven't heard it articulated this way.
Yeah.
And the last time it was articulated this way was what's the other psychologist that did it?
Oh, I have no idea.
It's
I mean, there have been a lot of psychologists that have brought different takes on the Bible. He's definitely not the first, so I think there's something else, you know?
Yeah, he's the guy who I heard say this was John Barron or something? Was that his name?
I don't know.
Some guy. He was on the Ben Shapiro Sunday Special. He also did an interview with Jordan Peterson too on it, and his thing was, oh yeah, this is really similar to how this guy was doing that back in, I think his name was Carl Hume, I think.
Oh, Hume?
Yeah, is that a psychologist?
He's a philosopher.
Philosopher, okay.
Yeah,
maybe,
that makes sense, yes.
Don't quote me on that name.
Yeah.
I think it's similar, it might be him, it might not be, but he was doing kind of that same Jordan Peterson-esque thing back in his day, and now Jordan Peterson is doing the Jordan Peterson.
Right.
But the point is that it's like this idea of an authentic relationship with people. That's exactly kind of what Jesus wrote in the New Testament, where he's talking about, and he goes right to the heart of it. I mean, the example he gives is, if you have a commandment like don't lust after, your neighbor's wife.
Right.
But if you do it in your head, you did it still.
Right.
Just because you didn't physically do it, I'm requiring this next level of commitment.
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's what you meant by that commandment. So for hundreds of years, we were doing it completely wrong and thought we were doing it right. It's just, that's like that next level. That's authenticity, I like to say.
I always thought of it a little bit differently, but not so dissimilar to what you just said. Like, in my head, I always use the other example, if you hate somebody in your heart, you've already murdered them, right? That one?
Similar, yeah.
Yeah. No, he gives like a couple examples. The one was the lust, if you lust after in your heart, but, you don't commit adultery, you've still committed adultery in your heart.
Yes.
The other example was murder. He's like, even if thou shalt not kill, right? But even if you hated someone in your heart, you've murdered them in your heart. So the way I saw it wasn't as much like a next level of commitment, but like almost like peeling a layer of falsity that you could say, like, because I didn't murder anyone, I actually am like all good.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, it's the idea of, yeah, you might not have murdered someone, but like the seed of every murder starts with hatred in your heart, and so it's like a greater reckoning with yourself.
Yeah,
you know
absolutely.
what I mean?
It's there's a difference between who you are in your public life and then who you are like when all the doors are closed and the lights are off.
Yeah.
Who are you then?
Right.
And if that's a dark person, then and you don't ever address those things or even admit that they're real or they're there, then
that's
nothing's
why
going to change.
I always appreciated Jesus' sayings like, go in a closet and pray. You don't have to do it in public, like, and say like, oh, look at me, I'm such a good person praying to God. I'm fasting in public and I feel terrible, but I'm doing it anyway. Here's some money for you poor man. Everybody look at me. He's like, no, go to your closet, pray. Do he's very all about like the heart, like the inside of the cup as opposed to the outside, right? Or not as opposed to, but including, I guess you would say.
Yeah, definitely including. Yeah, it's the idea of keeping just living those separate lives almost. I mean, we all do it to some degree.
Oh, of course.
I think I think for people who are aware of it, they try to bring more of themselves to the table. I'm one of those people. I mean, I do. I think I've got it fairly down, but we all have our regrets and our dark past and everything. And even today, I mean, you look at some of the values of what I would call the world system, where it's, if something happens to some child or something, we all are like, kill that guy. And who's going to say that a mother who lost her child to some murder or something? Who's going to tell her that her thoughts of vengeance aren't justified?
Right.
No, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
But then when you see that same mother say, oh, I have all these feelings and I'm so torn up, but I forgive you.
Yeah.
That is whole. That is, I mean, it's holy as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's power.
It is. And it's very recognizable power. It's like, I don't think anyone sees that and thinks like, what is that? I think it's like resonates with everybody, or at least a lot of people, you could say.
Yeah,
I don't want to go in extremes, but like,
of course not.
because I'm sure there's going to be some people who are like, what the hell is that? Just kill the dude. But it's just the inner strength that takes.
Yeah, that's
remarkable.
I think it's, at least for me, the values you find in there are superhuman. They're beyond us, because they're values of like a world system where it's like, you know, take your vengeance, get your money, you know, make sure you're, you know, even sometimes good things like self-reliance, self-sufficiency, these things can turn into something else entirely.
Absolutely.
And then you look at the Bible and it's like humility, humbleness, I mean, truth, like, and being, you know, showing up with your authentic self and being honest about good and the bad stuff. And it's like, that's not easy for, especially for imperfect beings. Who live in a system that promotes like, oh well, this person's so cool, be like that person. He has no flaws, so be like that.
Right. Especially with the social media culture now, where like all you see is the quote unquote perfect of like of everybody, and it's like, wow, this person. And are you listen to the Joe Rogan podcast? He had this one expert on how social media is linking to the rates of depression, and how it's making like huge impact because of this exact phenomenon of people seeing on social media, wow, this person's life is perfect, it seems, and all I see is happy pictures of them on wonderful vacations with their perfect relationship and their perfect pet, and then here I am with my real life that I'm like miserable sometimes, not all the time, hopefully, but I fight with my significant other, and we don't have these amazing vacations, but you're comparing your reality with someone's, you know, facade. So it's, of course, it's going to fail 100% of the time, but it's still creating a real impact, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, taking the discourse you find in the comment section off the table, because that's just...
that's a whole nother thing.
But yeah, it's like, one of the things I've been looking at recently on YouTube are these, like, the van life people who are, like, they modify these big vans and these big trucks. And, you know, you've seen them. And,
I'm all about that stuff.
They have, like, the sink inside, the toilet here, and the bed there, and it's like, van life, so cool. Yeah. And they do make it seem so glorious. And even I'm like, hey, like, going to my wife, like, hey, like, why don't we do this? Like, this would be awesome. Yeah. I can just, it's that same idea that, oh, this is just perfect. Everyone's always happy. Oh, we're here now. Things are great. Let me get my drone and get the sky shots. And it's like, there's more to it than that. Totally. I just think like anything, that stuff has got to be breaking down all the time. Stuff is going to be working. Right. What if you have a car problem? If you have a car problem, that's your house too. Like, you know, I'm thinking as like an automotive technician, you know, if that thing starts rusting away, or if your engine has some kind of failure, what are you going to do? Yeah.
And the big thing for me is always like the bathrooms. That's like, I don't know, everything else is great for me. Like I love tiny house stuff. And then we get to the bathrooms and I'm like, I'm on the fence. I don't know if I can do that anymore. Or like functioning showers or something like that, you know.
Well, that's the other thing. Yeah. Oh, van life is so cool. Hey, how do you dispose of your waste? Yeah. Oh yeah, I just have to, you know, grab it and like carry it to like some sewer when no one's looking. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of things they don't.
The reality of like a day in, day out maintenance of that. Yeah.
Well, we're already kind of getting into it, but Georgios, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me again. I appreciate it, man.
How do you say your last name, by the way?
Katsikis.
Katsikis?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to try to remember that.
Do your best. Feel free to ask if you need to.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to get an update with you because, you know, I just kind of, off air, we talked about a story of where I was bad and then I made a correction, and it made me think of you because that's, you know, those were the last time we talked about that stuff. I wanted to check in and see what's going on with your life, what's happening in your profession. Right. And just what's up.
Just for the record, I never thought you were bad.
Oh, no. I'm saying I know.
I just wanted to say, I just feel like whenever something like that happens to you, to me, to anybody, it's just you being human. You know what I mean?
Fair enough.
This isn't meant to admonish you or to be like, you should be doing it this way, but more to be like, I hope you can find comfort in that in the future one day, because man, sometimes we could be really human. You know what I mean? We could be like ultra human. And I know sometimes I need to hear that, so I just want to give that to you too.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. But to answer your question, where am I? So right now I'm at an internship at a school I will not identify just because of privacy reasons, but essentially it's a school specializing in children who are struggling not only academically but socio-emotionally and typically economically, because those go hand in hand a lot of the time. And in addition to that, I'm in school and I'm working teaching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so all of these are kind of blending together, because if you think about it, I'm in school to learn for my master's, I'm in a high school to teach socio-emotional skills, and I'm at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to teach classes. So I'm like always in some kind of class here or there. So the concept of being a student and being a teacher has taken on a whole new role. It's like living my life, you know?
That's awesome. You're teaching Jiu-Jitsu now?
Oh yeah, I've been teaching for a year now, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
6 p.m.?
6 p.m., yes. I've been, 4:30 to 9, essentially.
Awesome.
I'm there, yeah.
Long time. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I know that they sit there, and because I hang out with them. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. So, I don't remember. I know. Were you doing this last year too? We were in the same place, or this is a new? It's about a year
when
now.
was it?
It's been about a year.
If it's been within a year, then I was teaching then too. I must
Okay.
have started a few months ago or something.
I'm surprised
Yeah.
we didn't dive more into. Well, it was probably.
But
my fault.
we had so much to talk about. To
That's
be
true.
fair, we
That's
had
true.
like excess of the last podcast that we just went into. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
We had like an hour plus.
Oh my God! Yeah.
After the recording stopped, we could talk forever, man. I remember that. I feel that. Yeah.
That's awesome. I want to know socio-emotional problems.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? What are you doing to try to correct it?
Right. So that's pretty. What am I seeing? Let's start with that.
What's the most common? Most common. I'm sure you see a spectrum of craziness.
So it's hard to talk about these things, and this will relate later to psychedelics as well, because this is how I got into psychedelics, actually. It's important to bring up the concept of trauma. That's vital to this, because essentially what the school is a group of traumatized youth that didn't get the help, and it manifested in so many different problems. And that's why it's so variable, because trauma manifests in a variety of ways. It's not like everybody manifests in the same way. So some examples are heightened escalation. So like, let's say you and me are at a supermarket, right? And I'm sure you might have met someone like this before, and you maybe never thought about it. You just thought like, what's wrong with this guy? But like, let's say we bump shopping carts, and normally like it's not a big deal, but maybe this dude flips out. He's like, what the fuck was that, man? What the hell's going on? And then he's like, oh God, and he just like leaves. But like he went from 0 to like crazy over objectively not a big thing. Like, they're not your shopping carts. There was no significant damage anyway. None of your food was damaged. Really nothing happened that could have harmed anyone. But the response was, I guess you could say, I don't want to say unjustified, because for that person it was, but it was not, help me out here. It's not appropriate to the thing.
It was an appropriate response.
Exactly. It was not appropriate response. So that's the norm in this school. A lot of highly reactive kids who maybe they take something as an insult when they shouldn't, or maybe something bad happens and they panic. Like, the point is, the emotional reactions are high, fast, and strong. And so escalation is a big thing that needs to be kind of handled. So
Managed, at least.
Managed, yeah. So ideally, though, you don't want to always be there to hold their hand, right? To do it. You will have to sometimes, because if they've never seen it done, how are they supposed to know how to do it, right? It's like if no one ever taught you how to, I don't know, build a tiny home. How would you know? You could look it up, of course, but like, the impetus is a bit more on you than it is, and if you feel like you don't have help, you might just decide like, well, I just can't do it. I'm not the kind of person to build a tiny home. That's just not in my life, you know? It's not in my wheelhouse and whatever. But for a lot of these kids, opposite behaviors were modeled. So escalation was modeled for them, as well as the trauma imparted to them. So not only were they shown ways to react, but they were also given trauma which made them more reactive. And this is likely due to their parents also being victims to the trauma themselves. And it's like a very self-perpetuating cycle. And it unfortunately gets worse and worse if no one is there to stop it, which is really tragic if you think about it, because it's not like something where like you got -2 off on your socio-emotional points and it stays -2. No, like every year it's not handled, it goes -3, -4, and then it seems more of a hopeless case to the person involved. So it's very meaningful to work in these situations, because that's when you really feel like you're making a difference, like when Jesus is like, when you take care of the least of these, you are taking care of me. I really feel that here, because some of these kids, like, God bless their soul, I have never seen such hardworking people in my life. I see kids holding down 2 jobs while trying to go to high school. It's like, because their parents are facing a lot of hardship. And can you imagine, when I was in high school, I would not even really want to go to school. what
Yeah.
The motivation they must have to hold down those 2 jobs. And this is not like an isolated case. This is actually, I would say, most of the kids are working full-time while going to high school.
Wow.
So it's remarkable in a lot of ways, the durability of the human spirit, but also just to say, should they really be having to work so hard and push themselves so hard against such a situation that seems very stacked against them? You know what I mean?
Yes. Wow.
Yeah.
You said that it kind of goes down every year. I mean, is this something that is curable, like with treatment over time, or is this something that they are going to have to deal with like their entire lives?
That's a really good question. Really segues to the psychedelic section to some degree, because when I was learning about trauma, is really a fascinating subject all on its own, trauma, because it shows how it impacts the mind and the body as well. So you would normally think like trauma is like a mental thing, but there's some interesting statistics, like depending on how many childhood trauma experiences you had, and let's say no other experiences, just a couple in childhood, your rate of heart disease goes up, your rate of cancers go up, stroke, all these other crazy things. Your risk of being raped in some cases goes up. Your risk of being in a violent altercation goes up, for the obvious reasons I specified before with the escalation. Mm-hmm. And so for a long time, well, for one thing, it's kind of interesting to note, the guy who coined, PTSD, Van der Kolk, I'm a huge fan of him, he was initially trying to get that diagnosis put in to the American Psychiatric Association, and they rejected it. Believe it or not, they said there's no such thing. These soldiers are just like, they're adjusting. There's nothing wrong with them, because he was specifically talking about veterans at the time, right? He was working for the VA. Later, after it became enough of an issue, they're like, yeah, okay, well, PTSD is a diagnosis now. So now he is doing the same thing with a condition called developmental trauma. It's essentially saying if you experience some kind of traumatic event in childhood, it is demonstrating, the evidence is kind of building up to show that it affects you later in life, even if nothing else happens to you, in a very predictable way. So it's not very like hit or miss. So since this induction of both PTSD and developmental trauma has been rejected, by the way. It's not an official diagnosis, but a lot of people still accept it anyway, because this dude he's fire, you know what I mean? Like, he's a very good researcher. They've been trying to find different ways to deal with it. It's very difficult, because it's so systemic, like from a medical perspective. If you look at something like, and I might be butchering this, so grain of salt for everyone who's listening, but if you have like heart disease, right, it's typically not only your heart that suffers, it's typically sometimes your lungs have to work harder, because maybe you're not getting enough oxygen to your body parts, so maybe you're laboring more. Maybe, I don't know, you have more trouble with glucose impairment and glucose sensitivity because of some problem with your heart. So it's never just like, okay, the cardiovascular system is by itself, and then the digestive system is separate, and then the pulmonary system is separate. Usually one impacts the other. And this is also very true with trauma. So they've developed three different approaches to deal with trauma. One is what's called top-down. So you would talk to me about your story. We'd work on some ways to work on your behavior, let's say, like, or some problematic thoughts. So like if you have experienced trauma from a car accident and now you're getting nightmares every day about car accidents, and your baseline is very high stress every day because of this car accident, and you're that guy in that supermarket now. You bump things, you freak out. Maybe you don't freak out at the person, maybe you freak out at yourself for freaking out. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Being like, why am I so afraid? Nothing happened, Jesus. Mm-hmm. You know? So you would deal with it in a way that you would talk through it, understand like, okay, this is a trauma I'm going through, and then try to work in maybe positive self-talk or new cognitive strategies to deal with it, like saying, when I bump into someone, I will understand it's a trauma, and I will say like, hey, I'm safe now, I'm not in the car accident, I'm in a supermarket, and then talk your way out. The other way is bottom up, which is becoming a lot more popular now, and it's shown some interesting efficacy. I think the reason it wasn't explored more because it sounds like, ooh, you know, like very spiritual nonsense, but it's been remarkably effective, and it's basically saying, at the level of your nervous system, without you having to do anything mentally, if you can discharge the excess nervous system activity, you can get rid of a lot of the effects of trauma. So this includes doing yoga, which has been remarkably effective. This includes meditating in some ways. This includes some somatic therapies where someone's like massaging you and like telling you things, and then you just release it. Some of these things are different exercise methods, kind of like yoga, where you try to work out different parts of your body that may be holding the trauma, because some muscles actually grip from the traumatic event that never let go. So if you were like bracing during the car accident, maybe a part of that never let go, and it's causing nervous system distress to your body. And the last way is the way that's most commonly dealt with, and that's you're trying to decrease the arousal level. So if after a trauma most people are escalated, you want to find a way to de-escalate, whether that's through breathing exercise, what's the anti-anxiety medication?
No. I want to say Ritalin, but no.
No.
Is that the opposite?
No, you would not want to do.
It's the opposite. I know.
But anyways, you get the point. So you give them an anti-anxiety medication, or you would use something like, I guess you would use desensitization therapy, or exposure therapy rather, and you would try to get their general baseline level lower, just so that they could be less reactive. So the reason psychedelic assisted therapy, I'm not saying this is why it's effective, but it's interesting because it hits all three, and very rarely does anything hit more than one. So the ones that do hit more than one, they're seen as like a gold standard, which is not that effective as it is for trauma, unfortunately. And it takes a lot of work, years of effort, a lot of sacrifice on the part of the person who experienced the trauma, and especially for cases of childhood trauma where this stuff is a lot more ingrained, because you have to think they grew up with this and it might have not been dealt with for 10, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, however old the person is. And then it's just built up over that time. You know, you can imagine the exponential damage that causes.
Because it doesn't ever go away. It just like you said, it manifests. It just spreads into different things, and then soon, it comes out sometimes. And you got to put the cap back on. But it's always,
Exactly.
It's like a pressure cooker. It's always trying to come out, and then when it does, sometimes you cap it. But
absolutely,
there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Just as you're talking about all this stuff, I just couldn't help but think that, you see some people who have gone through like horrific things, and they come out and they're like, yeah, like this happened, it was really bad, and like, they're very well adjusted, and for whatever reason they seem to be at peace with it, and somehow they've managed to deal with it through something by the grace of God, who knows. And then other people who have experienced something that, objectively speaking, could be considered really not that big a deal, and it's the end of the world. It's the apocalypse.
Yes.
And that person is going, for them, they would need treatment and everything. And it's just amazing the spectrum of people. Where like in someone in your position, you need to be so compassionate and so understanding. Where like even in your head, your opinion might be like, you're traumatized by that. Oh my God, that's pathetic. But it's, you know, here you are. No, I'm not saying you in general.
No, so I have a funny story. That's why I was laughing. So, speaking of being compassionate, I had a situation with my girlfriend. I know she won't mind me telling the story. But we were walking at a park, and we saw a mongoose literally chasing a rabbit. And I was like, oh, look, it's like, you know, it's hunting, literally. My girlfriend had no idea mongooses were like carnivores. And it ran by, so she was like, whatever. They run by us again, right in front of us. The mongoose latches onto the rabbit. The rabbit shrieks for dear life, and it kills the rabbit. It starts twitching. My girlfriend starts freaking out. And I'm just like, it's nature, dude. Like, I don't know what to tell you. It's not that big. I mean, it needs to eat. How is it going to eat, you know? But she's having a lot of problem. And that's like a time, like you're saying, I should have had more compassion. And I was very human in that moment. I'm like, calm down. It's like, it's nature. But she was really upset. And, you know, it was one of those situations where, like you said, you got to have compassion. But to answer your question, they actually do have a lot of research on why people react to traumas the way they do. And some people are fine. And it's a big factor into this thing called learned helplessness. Have you ever heard about that?
No.
Oh, Steve, this is fantastic. This is like a great subject. I don't know how to describe it. It's so all-encompassing. It's very fantastic. So the guy who discovered it did it in a very fucked up way, if you don't mind me saying so. Can I curse on this?
Free speech, man.
Okay, good.
Free speech podcast.
So this is before a lot of regulations were put on testing. So he did this thing where he would have 2 different grates these dogs could walk on. And in one grate, he would play a noise and then shock any dog who was standing on that grate. And so the dog would learn if he jumped over, he would be safe because only one of the grates was electrified. He did this over and over. And the dogs that were able to, you know, jump through and learn that, I think every dog learned that. So then the second step came where he would put like I think it was something like a contraption where they would have to solve a puzzle to get out of the crate and, you know, into the safe zone. So he would play the noise and then shock them. And the dogs would, like, for dear life, like, you know, figure it out and they'd go through. I think all of them, or almost all of them did it. I'm not 100% sure, but it was the majority. Lastly, he had a no solution way. So he just played the noise, shocked the dogs. The dogs tried to escape, they couldn't. He kept doing this until the dogs literally gave up on trying to escape. Now he left it wide open to go from one grate to the other, and he played the sound. The dog just stayed there and took it, even though it could have escaped. And it was almost impossible for the dogs to unlearn that they could help themselves again, essentially. So this goes on with a lot of other different studies they've done because, for example, are you familiar with Pavlov's dog with the bell? Yeah.
I know the name. Remind me of what he did.
Oh, just he's most famous for he would ring a bell and then feed the dog and then measure their saliva, and then he would ring a bell, feed the dog, measure the saliva.
So they attributed the bell with food.
Yeah,
right?
so even if he didn't feed it, they would salivate a lot. He found something out by accident with his dogs. One day, all his dogs were in like crates in his basement, and his basement flooded. And the dogs didn't drown, but they freaked out a lot because the water was like coming up. He got them all safe, but some of the dogs had actually escaped. The dogs that did not escape were experiencing things that you could call depression or trauma. They didn't want to eat, they didn't want to move. While the dogs that did escape acted as if nothing happened. So with humans, we're a little bit different, right? Because we have some level of intelligence that's beyond animals in a lot of ways. But we're also not that different from animals. So in this way, children who will grow up and learn that no matter what they do, they fail, they tend to just have this as an automatic belief and they stop trying. And this is learned helplessness, essentially. So if they experience the trauma, for example, and like not many people know what trauma is or how it's experienced, right? So why would this little kid, let's say he was abused as a child in some way, or let's say he saw a murder, or his father left the home for an extended period of time, or mother, or whatever it may be, and now he had these symptoms of trauma, and so he has a lot of symptoms similar to ADD, ADHD. And so he's having trouble concentrating in school, he's acting out a lot, socio-emotional problems, he's getting into fights with his classmates, and all the while the teachers are like, you're not doing a good job, you're not doing a good job. And all he sees is his grades are failing. No matter how hard he tries, he's fighting uphill against these socio-emotional problems caused by the trauma. So he starts to believe no matter how hard he tries, he's going to fail, so why should he try anymore? And then this just perpetuates. And so this is kind of a big thing. But just to get back to answering your question, kids who have experienced a prior trauma are more likely as adults to take something and re-traumatize themselves. So like you said, if two people are in a car accident, anyone in the car who had any prior experience with childhood trauma is 2 to 3 times more likely to be traumatized by that event. Furthermore, there's another interesting thing that will kind of elucidate how people get traumatized or not. A kid's soccer camp got trapped in a mine, I believe, or a landslide or something. I forgot what it was, but they were trapped underground. And all of them got traumatized except for one kid. And that's because it was the only kid that was digging to get out. So if you are taking steps to improve your situation or escape, you're less likely to experience the trauma. So that's why a lot of the times people who are driving may be less likely to be traumatized than the passenger, because the passenger can't control the car. The driver can have some control, even if it's very little and they're sliding, right? So that's another thing about that. It's just a lot of factors go into it, but learned helplessness and ability to not just be in control, but to feel like you're in control, because that's the mental part of the human, right? We don't actually have to be in control. A lot of people think they're in control and they're not, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes it'll benefit them.
You talk about that the story with the dogs and being shocked just kind of pointlessly. Well, and it's like, and you think, well, glad we have standards now. They probably don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But it's like, aren't you kind of glad you have that data?
Oh,
like,
totally.
Isn't that like, it's one of those weird things where like, I don't like that he did it, but I'm glad that we have that information now.
Right,
and it's like, there's no pretty way to get that information.
Absolutely. There's never going to be a good way to study trauma, like that. But yeah, I agree.
Wow. That's wild. And so, I think you're right. I mean, first chapter in Jordan Peterson's book, he compares our nervous system to that of lobsters.
Yeah.
And so I think with that respect, it's probably very similar.
Absolutely. Actually, ever since I heard Jordan Peterson, there's this one thing I heard him say, and I think some YouTube thing that I have been obsessed with because of its truth. And it's not a good truth, which is a little sad, because I don't like to tell people, because I feel like this is a thing I think they attribute to Jesus or God as like a negative, like God is a dick for saying this, when I think it was more meant as like, this is just how life is. It's not like I want it this way, you want it this way, it's just how it is. Where he said, to those who have much, more will be given. To those who have little, more will be taken away. And that's the lobster thing right there. If the lobster loses, his testosterone goes down, his cortisol goes up. I think serotonin was also a big factor there. It's going to be more likely to be depressed, and with less testosterone, it's less likely to win in a further fight. So it just perpetuates, similar to the trauma. If you experience a trauma, you're not going to get better. You're literally going to get worse with no help. You're literally going to be more subject to the worst parts of society. So I thought that was mind-blowing for me,
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that I've looked at a lot lately, having a couple guests on in the next, actually this week, I have 2 guys come on, I hope to talk about some of the issues that we see with people in America, particularly in the black community of America.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of discussion of like, what's going on, here are the stats, all this stuff going on. Right. And some people have this argument that it comes from, it's all socioeconomics, it's all kind of this institutional, like, embedded racism in people. And I'm just like, well, where's, what about the family? You see these statistics where the family, like the family's broken one way or another.
Yeah.
You have information from both left and right-leaning institutions, Heritage Foundation, Brookings Institute, that say, listen, like kids that don't grow up with like a nuclear family are subject to everything bad, like 50%, 70%, everything bad.
Yeah.
Everything.
It's
crime,
tragic.
Poverty, emotional problems, everything.
It's
and it's
really
like,
bad.
I'm like, that to me seems to be the cornerstone of that issue. And it's like, and the reason I think that it's not a uniquely racial issue. That's like, if any group or culture or geographically centered people experience that, the same results are going to happen. It's like, it's a very human kind of statistic, I think.
I agree. Yeah. So I think the part where I start to lean away a bit, I agree, it's a very human thing. It's not about race until it starts to be concentrated within a race. Do you know what I mean? So, like, I agree in the fact that everyone will react the same if you don't have a father in your life. But if 65%, which is a real statistics, of black families don't have fathers, compared to 20% of white families and 30% of Hispanic families, that's a stark difference.
It's alarming.
And you have to ask, like, why is that happening? You have to, and then it's one of those questions where you just keep asking why, like a child, why, and then that's when you get to some like disturbing things of trauma, essentially, and asking like, okay, this is obviously a self-perpetuating cycle of like, so this father is not in the picture, so the son, let's say, has developmental trauma. We're not really have anything to break the cycle right now, so he perpetuates that. He gets more into violent behavior. He doesn't believe he's academically successful. Around him, he's seeing a lot of other traumatized people, so he sees this as acceptable behavior because everyone else is acting like him, plus it's what feels right to him. Then he grows up, probably has a teen pregnancy with someone else, because that's what happens when you have trauma. You make more impulsive decisions, and then in the midst of this, maybe he gets locked up, and now it perpetuates the cycle again. And so I think the question is like, where does it go so far back? Because you have to ask who was the first person to be traumatized in that kind of way, right? And not to say that you would ever get a satisfying answer, I think, because that's like going down this weird rabbit hole, right? But I think a lot could be said for this idea of slavery, essentially, like, if you think about, there's another interesting study with mice. So another kind of fucked up trauma study with mice.
Is this the one where mice learn like a terrible thing's going to happen having never experienced that?
Yes, exactly.
That's what I thought you were going to talk about, the dogs. But so summarize that for us. I am familiar with that one because that one was interesting.
Yeah, I think they sprayed like a neutral scent, and then they would do something terrible. I can't remember if it was a shock or what to the mouse, and then they just do it until they would just smell the scent, and they noticed the mouse's cortisol would go up, basically signifying stress. Later on, they'd have a child who was never exposed to that, but every time they smelled that now, it'd create a strong cortisol stress reaction in them.
So without having ever experienced it, that baby mouse knew like, oh god, something's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Oh, like.
So this is also like a big explanatory for people why we tend to be inherently terrified of snakes, right? We may have never been bitten, but we know something's not good about that thing, slithering on the ground. Yeah.
Well, nothing else moves like that, I mean, like, so not too long ago, I saw, I think, the biggest snake in my life. We were at this lake, and I'm just walking, like, I had a pet snake. I'm not like afraid of snakes, but like, you're walking out, and you just like, it's not human moving, it's like, it's weird. It's like, it's got no legs, and you look at it, and you're just like, whoa, you're not used to seeing that every day.
Very true.
And I think it's not too dissimilar. Well, maybe it is, but you look at like how a machine moves. Like, you ever see that movie Ex Machina?
Yeah.
Oh man, I saw that on a plane. Just there's a lot to that movie. There's more in that movie than
I really liked it. It was only like what four actors too. Yeah. It's crazy. It's such a good movie.
5, something like that. Yeah, it's. But there's so much to analyze there, and it's like, I don't know how they did it, but you could tell like it's a person playing it, but the movements were not human. Like,
Yeah.
you knew, like, this is not a human.
Yeah.
That is definitely a robot. Like,
Yeah.
just by these weird kind of movements and
Right.
mannerisms.
Yeah, it's like close but not
Yeah.
there, and there's something off, and it's like a little freaky, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
And it's like, but that's a whole nother.
Yeah.
That's, it's funny. I actually saw that movie based on this like YouTube analysis of it. 'Cause
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I never seen this movie, and I'm probably never going to see it. And I watched it, and I was like, oh, I have to see this movie now.
Yeah.
I don't know how it was a rabbit hole I was down, but
We've all been there.
but it was worth it.
Yeah.
It was like, wow, this is nuts. But yes, so going back to what we were talking about, the inherited
Trauma.
trauma.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they're starting to find a genetic basis for that in terms of epigenetics and methylation. Yeah. So it's not that. That's why I think there's a lot of push towards this actually being a race issue, because it started as a race issue with slavery, right? They may have had what do you call it, dead white debt slaves at one point, but once they got black slaves from Africa, it was like, we're good, right? We're set. And so from there, it did become a distinctly racial issue, because if everyone who descended from a racist policy like slavery, obviously, I don't think anyone's going to argue that, right? It becomes an issue of, okay, you freed the slaves, but not only did you not compensate them for all their work, but you didn't compensate them emotionally to heal their scars. And now they're going to pass on maybe further trauma through their actions and through their genetics now as well, especially if that never gets dealt with. And then we talk about further trauma from like racism, like lynchings, right? And racist actions like redlining and stuff like that, where you are always perpetually not quite feeling like you fit and like you don't belong.
And people were telling you, they're like, oh, you know, I mean, regardless of your position on the president, I mean, people accuse him of being a racist and a Nazi all the time. Yeah. And that has to have some impact, I think, on that
totally.
too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now you're thinking, now he's that, well, his voters must be that.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, he's the government. The institutions are,
exactly.
That must be a really dark way to live life, I think.
Yeah.
Just, everything's against you, and
well, it's very tough.
The police,
absolutely.
I can't imagine.
Absolutely. And you know what's another very disturbing aspect of trauma is, so we have this thing called an amygdala. It's very popular in science because although people say it regulates fear, actually what it regulates is how you experience novel situations, so things that you have no experience with. And because our brain has to classify as like, is this safe or is this going to kill me, right? If you've experienced trauma, it's most likely novel things are, it's going to kill me, because that's your experience. So that's what your brain does. It learns like, wow, when I was a child, I experienced a really terrible thing, and so that taught me the world is not a safe place. So I should treat new things as not safe things so I can stay alive, because that's survival, So it's so many things stacked against things like that. You need to reverse it, right? There's no other way. Otherwise, you really got to abandon a significant portion of the population, which I don't think is morally acceptable. Do you know what I mean?
So let's get into solutions then. I mean,
exactly.
What do you do with? I mean, so you have a couple different ideas. I think you have your treatments.
Yeah.
But now you're talking about these psychedelics, which we kind of talked, I think, a little bit last time.
Right.
Has there been any new developments with that? We can go over the basics and kind of see. Then I remember I talked to my wife after that.
Yeah.
She did not seem very impressed with it. I guess it must still be an early kind of.
Oh.
No.
No, it's very strong, robust research now.
Do tell.
So first of all, one of them was already medicalized. Esketamine is used to treat depression now, with great results. The FDA has granted MDMA, commonly known as ecstasy, and psilocybin from magic mushrooms, chemical from magic mushrooms, as designating them breakthrough status, which means essentially the FDA will work hand in hand with the clinical trials in order to accelerate the medicalization of these substances, because they have shown such promise with diseases that have no known treatment. So such as PTSD, such as depression. I mean, if you think about it, our current SSRIs are not that effective. They work for 30 to 50% of the population, and after 3 months, the dosage needs to go up kind of like you need more caffeine. Every time, if you're like a coffee drinker, you have 2 cups, now you need 3 cups, and then 4, and then suddenly it's just not doing anything for you anymore. The same model tends to hold true with SSRIs in a lot of ways.
Wow.
Not for everybody, but for most people. So the really promising thing about psychedelics is with the proper therapy, because it's not recreationally, taking something and then hanging out, right?
Yeah. It's like supervised, I assume, or like at least kind
heavily
of controlled,
supervised,
monitored. Or...
exactly, by 2 licensed professionals, and in a medical facility. And within 1 or 2 treatments, people who have suffered from depression most of their life have remission for at least up to several years at this point, from 1 treatment.
That's incredible.
1 or 2 treatments. Same thing with MDMA for PTSD, and they've been trying to see the range of these substances. So one of them was psilocybin for addictions. So everybody is very familiar, I think, with how big opiate addictions are becoming in the United States. It's I don't know if you're familiar with this, but what's the word? The lifespan?
Oh, or it's gone down, right?
Yes.
First time in like a long time.
Exactly, because of opiate addictions and all this.
Fentanyl and heroin.
Exactly.
And all this garbage.
Yes, absolutely. And it's causing like a real problem. Also, trauma, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I mean, you got to think, why are people going to drugs?
Yes.
And I think they're trying to find some kind of meaning in their life.
Yeah.
And instead, they're not finding the meaning. So they're like, well, if I'm not going to find any meaning, I might as well just be kind of inebriated for a time period. Whether I'll get drunk, then maybe that doesn't work, and then maybe I'm drinking with my friends, and now marijuana comes. Oh, these 2 drugs are safe. Oh, well, heroin must be fine. Cocaine, well, probably it's cocaine next, and then heroin, and then
Yeah. So you should definitely, as an aside, check out Gabor Mate. He's one of the most brilliant doctors I've ever seen in regards to addiction. He's mind-blowing. He's worked with addiction for a lot of his life. He's studied it for a long time, and he has actually a very good track record with helping people with addictions. And he's just now started to get into psychedelics because he's seen the promise. So the interesting thing about the psychedelic movement that kind of makes it unlike any other scientific revolution in a lot of ways is that actually it started in the 1950s, and it was already showing promise then.
they shut it down.
And they shut it down due to I actually wrote a paper on this because obviously I'm very passionate on the subject, and it was basically the history of the policy of psychedelic substances, in particular focus on psychedelic therapies. Because actually the primary use for LSD at the time, medically, was to treat alcohol use disorder, alcoholism. And it was very successful. A lot of famous high-profile people used it. Obviously of that time, not now.
Yeah, no.
it's like if I say Cary Grant, I think some people know, but but maybe not a lot. Depends how old you are, I guess. But it was very popular, and then due to what's widely seen as, rather than health risks or mental health risks, it was due to what they deemed as social risk. So because they felt it was fomenting too much anti-war sentiment, they decided to shut it down.
Really?
This was during the Vietnam War.
Well, it's probably associated with all the hippies doing drugs and stuff.
Exactly.
And probably, you know what, I have a good friend who's coming on in October as well, and I think you guys would get along really well. He's just the weed man. He's like, he's done all this research on it. Like, well, I shouldn't call him the weed man. He's the weed scholar, I should call him. Like, he is a weed historian. Yeah. And he kind of tells the same story, where they had this thing called hemp, and it was super useful for all these things. And, it's better than cotton, and then, industry got in bed with government, or one way or the other. Yes. Whatever, they came together, and they're like, we're getting rid of this. We're going to take this this THC plant. We're going to call it marijuana. Which, I don't think anyone was calling it that at the time.
It was a Mexican name.
Yes, and we're gonna classify it in the same stuff as like these truly it's like marijuana, and then cocaine and heroin and crack and like all these other like. It's like whoa, these are not the same thing. Like, I think even today, I think it's still like a Schedule 1 drug or something
Schedule
like that.
1.
Which is like the worst thing you could ever too.
And to be fair, I'm not the person to talk about marijuana with. I don't really know it that well compared to how I know psychedelics, at least. So I don't feel confident talking about it. But yeah, I mean, I think just from a cursory glance at the benefits it's having now, Schedule 1 meaning high addictive potential and no medical use at the same time, it doesn't really fit that, right?
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, in the history of the Controlled Substances Act, which had created the scheduling, drugs have only gone up in schedule, but never down.
Oh, that's
so
typical of government, I think.
Yeah, so it's like we've only restricted it more, but even with all this evidence, we haven't really let it go.
Yeah. I mean, even like, so you have, if you just look at that plant in general, you have hemp, you have CBD oil, you have the THC, which I guess I'm learning now that I guess in edible form, it actually is somewhat of a psychedelic.
Yeah, just a bit.
Just a, like it's not a whole lot.
It's different, so it hits the same receptor, which is serotonin 5-HT2A, but there's a lot of other stuff in there that alters the experience a bit. But yes,
like it's I guess the absorption, because you're digesting it as opposed to inhaling it. It's like it reacts a little differently, but it's not like LSD or anything like that. It's very mild, I think, compared to the other psychedelics.
Right.
But yeah, it's like, wait, like even if this thing is bad, like let's at least see, like maybe it has a cool use. I don't know. But like let's do some studies on it. Let's let people experiment with it. And
Absolutely.
Stuff. And I mean at this point it's 2019. I think everyone is very aware that marijuana is really not that big a deal.
Yeah. I mean, have you heard Jordan Peterson talk about psychedelics at all?
No.
Oh really?
No.
He has some things on it.
Well, maybe like he bring up like SSRIs in passing, but I don't.
No, it's full on LSD, mescaline, stuff like that.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. He has an interesting take on it, obviously from a religious standpoint, or not obvious, but religious/psychological standpoint. But it's I really invite you to listen. It's fantastic.
I think that if you have taking a drug and that drug forces you almost to go so deep inside yourself to confront your, as he would say, your dragons and stuff.
Yes. Exactly.
If there's something that can make you do that, like, because you're not doing it, and if you can somehow, with the help of someone, a physician maybe trying to help you get there, like if they force you to confront that, I think what you're talking, you said earlier, I like the discharge of excess
nervous system energy.
Nervous system energy. Like, I mean, I think there's something to that.
Yeah.
I really do. There's something to that we shouldn't be like afraid to just check out, just experiment with.
Absolutely.
I mean,
at least study, right?
Yeah, at least so we can like.
Especially when the results previously had been promising and now shut down, and now like it's starting back up. The first thing they had to do actually was repeat the old experiments under more rigorous standards, just to say like, look, they weren't bad experiments.
Well, reproducible results.
Exactly.
Like, let us keep going. Let's see. This is the scientific method.
Yeah. So it's quite funny because I forgot if I told you this on the last one or if it was off the record, but the first thing they used it on was people who were already terminally ill. They were already dying, and they had end-of-life existential depression or anxiety. Basically, they were afraid they were going to die. They were terrified and they were depressed. And basically, it treated that to a large degree of people. And some people had remissions, so some people actually survived, and others did not. But either way, they were all very just content and very not content like, oh, I'm gonna die, that's fine, but like
I'm at peace with it,
and really wanting to make amends for anything that they had done before, and really want to connect with family like they've never done before. And I was at a World Science Festival, and they had a psychedelic panel, and they invited two of the people who actually were treated, and it was really touching to hear one person who didn't know what life was even like without anxiety or depression, had no concept for it.
Wow.
And this other woman who had breast cancer, who just felt so thankful that she got breast cancer just so she could experience this. And she talked a lot about the love of God and experiencing that in this. And it's no surprise, I don't know if it's a little known fact, it's not absolute, but typically people who experience psychedelics and who are atheists tend to become more spiritual or more religious leaning. So, I mean, this is why Jordan Peterson's really kind of interested, because it's kind of like you see the face of God, and you can't see the face of God and go back to where you were before. And if I'm taking a spiritual religious position on this, I just think that's that's how it is. You have experiences and you can't go back to not knowing, right? Like you face your dragon and you can't unface the dragon now. It's already been faced,
Yeah.
you know, it's behind you. But to use your example, actually, I thought that was such a good point you made. In the concept of facing your dragon, what psychedelics do is they bring you to your dragon, they make the dragon a lizard, and they, I guess the thing before all of it is they let you see that it is a problem. You know, it's like, oh, you do need to face this. This isn't like something in the periphery that you haven't really seen before. It has you look straight at it for the first time. And then it makes it not less threatening, and it makes you more powerful. And it's through those three things that I told you before: the top-down approach, the bottom-up approach, and the decreased arousal. So from top down, you're able to finally see it as a problem for the first time, like addiction, if you have never really seen what a problem it is. I know that sounds a little weird because some people really have like hard lives, but because of addiction. But if you've ever heard of addicts talk about hitting rock bottom and why that's such an important experience, it's oftentimes because that's like some of the first times these people have really seen the problems their addiction has caused, and before then they've been able to lie to themselves about it. And it's the same thing with psychedelics. Without having to hit rock bottom, they're able to see the real impact this is having on their lives and the true value of themselves, and at the same time their arousal level is kept at a lower rate, so they're not freaking out and unable to deal with it, and they're feeling typically feelings of love. Not always, but typically. And at the very least they're feeling safety. And finally they're getting this discharge, and it's just hitting all three in such a spectacular way that, I mean, I guess the results speak for themselves in terms of addiction, depression, anxiety, trauma. They're working on eating disorders now, and this all speaks to a whole. I promised myself I would bring this up, even though it's kind of like a small rant.
Go.
But a problem with our mental health system today is our diagnosis, the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual. So if this was any other branch of medicine, there would be better standards than this. That us using terms like, oh, this person has depression based off what they're telling me. You know, like if this is cardiology and you're telling someone like,
I have chest pain.
yeah, I have chest pain, shortness of breath. It's like, okay, your diagnosis is chest pain. That would never pass. That would never pass. And yet that's exactly what we do with mental health, with psychiatry. And it's really unfortunate because I think it's kind of blinded us in the same way in facing our dragon to see what other options are there. Because when you think about it, if there's like one drug that treats so many mental health problems, you have to ask, are we treating multiple mental health problems or really just one that's presenting in different ways?
Yeah.
You know? That's my spiel anyway.
No, that's all great stuff.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, we talked a lot about the benefits,
Yeah.
and just a question that popped in my head. I'm like, people use this stuff also recreationally. Like, let's say, how do you steer the course that the drug takes you? You know, like let's say, let's say like I have trauma, I come to you,
Yeah.
you're observing me, I take some LSD.
Yeah.
I mean, how can and you're like, all right, let's guide you through your trauma, and I'm like, I'm Superman, like, and I'm like, I'm gone, I'm out of it.
Very appropriate.
I didn't even. That's weird. But I'm wearing a Superman shirt right now, and that's weird. But yeah, like, how do you? I mean, it doesn't seem clear to me that like, why does it seem that the drug always will only bring you to your dark spot instead of just like some crazy, far out kind of experience?
That's a really great question, and it has a very complex answer. Where to start? That's actually
Can you guide it? Can you guide the experience? I guess.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So this is really the question. This is what translates it from recreational use to medical use. Is the answer to this question. So the biggest things about Xanax, that was the thing I was thinking of before, the anti-anxiety medication. Because it's relevant now again.
Ritalin is the opposite, right? Isn't it wire you up?
Yeah,
okay,
pretty much.
Don't do that. Don't listen to me.
Anybody who's listening and has anxiety, don't take Ritalin.
Yeah, don't do that. Dr. Steve in the house, baby.
the reason I remembered it was because it's relevant. So, let's say you take a Xanax, right? We could be here sitting on a bench in a beautiful place, or we could be in the middle of a classroom that's very stressful. The Xanax will work the exact same way every time because it's a primarily biological, pharmacological type activity, right? The interesting thing is with psychedelics, the treatment comes not necessarily from the chemical, but from the experience the chemical creates. So that's what's really interesting about it.
Experience the chemical creates.
Yes.
Okay.
So, the trip, if you would. So, if you want to guide the trip and you want it to be medical as opposed to recreational, you want to pay attention to several factors, but the top three, which are commonly called SET, short for mindset, having a preparation before going in. That means having other discussions with your therapist about what particular problem you want to tackle several sessions before you even have it. Second is setting, which is your environment. So if it's when they first started doing the studies of LSD, they had no idea what it did. So they did it in a clinical lab room, hooked up to an IV, and it was freaking the people out. So they thought, well, this drug must make you crazy.
They had a bad trip.
Yeah, because everybody's having bad trips. But once in a while, people would be having very good trips. They would claim to see God, they would claim to be in heaven, all this stuff. And they'd be like, well, it can't just, they called it psychotomimetic, because they said it would create a psychotic state, because that's what they believe. But they were like, it doesn't quite fit, because there's some people who are having really good experiences from this. So later, they coined psychedelic, I think some authors, Aldous Huxley, if I'm not mistaken, Humphrey Osmond, I'm not sure. But they claimed psychedelic because it's more or less means soul manifesting or mind manifesting. So the way to control it is having a setting that's peaceful, relaxing. So you could think of, this would actually be, minus the public nature of it, this would not be a bad setting. It's very nice, it's beautiful, right? There's trees, there's a nice bench, good company. Setting includes the people you're around, right? So those are the two, and in this case it would mean having 2 licensed therapists. Usually they have one of each gender, but that might be changing now, depending. They're not sure, because this is also very new, right? So they're not sure what is the best combination of environment to make it a good trip. Lastly, they have in most sessions blindfold and headphones playing music, non-instrumental music. I'm sorry, non-vocal music, because they don't want you to be swayed by any words people are saying, but they do. There is some studies on music theory to show what kind of music exactly is helping the trip along best towards a mystical experience.
Oh, wow.
Because basically, if you take the drug, I might get this wrong, but so these might be bullshit statistics, so bear with me.
Opinion from here on out until I'll specify otherwise.
I just remembered that it doubled. So people who were smokers and were trying to quit and took psilocybin had, I think, like a 30 or 40% chance of quitting. But if they took the drug and had a mystical experience, it went up to 80%. It doubled. That's the only thing I remember. It literally doubled, depending on if you had a mystical experience or not. So all the work towards set and setting is towards getting you to that mystical experience, because it has the highest relation towards success in whatever parameter you're looking for, whether it's to treat depression, treat anxiety, or so on. Now, to go to the opposite end, because I think it's always fair to talk about the risks, right?
Yeah,
it's not fair to just me like proselytize.
It's the best thing,
the best thing, no problem. Everyone take it. Everyone should do it, right? Which is like, when you get very zealous about something, it's very easy to do. But I like to bring things back down, right? Because this is in the end a tool, and like all tools, could be used for good or for bad.
And they have limits and strengths,
exactly.
and weaknesses, and
yes. So there are small percent of cases, I think 1 in a million, something like that, of people who have reoccurring, I forgot the exact name of it, but it's essentially,
they start tripping out of nowhere.
Yeah, after you've taken it, you'll just start tripping again randomly. It's not extremely uncommon, but it does happen. The other dangers are people having a bad trip, which isn't necessarily the worst thing, because people still get the results after.
Really?
Yeah, but they have a terrible experience, so they experience psychological stress.
Oh boy.
And there are a small subset of people who do get more depressed afterwards for a short amount of time, I think like a few days to a week. And this all has to do with like the idea of setting, dose, and how much you should be doing it, how often. Because interestingly enough, in a study done comparing occurrences of mental illness and overlapping with people who use what drug, almost every drug, alcohol to marijuana to heroin to cocaine, has a positive correlation with, so basically the more you do this drug, the more like, or I don't want to use it causation, but it's correlation, right?
Yeah.
The more likely you are to have a mental illness, and vice versa, right? So even if it's like marijuana or cigarettes or alcohol, right? It's not just like the hard stuff like heroin or cocaine where you're like, man, this dude must have a mental illness to be doing this stuff. All of them, except for psychedelics. Actually, in recreational psychedelic users, you tend to have more positive mental health benefits over time. And again, that's not to say you should recreationally use it. I'm definitely not saying that. I'm just saying that's an interesting fact. You know, among all the drugs that people are seeing as like numbing agents, or as you said, like maybe people are trying to find something else in the drug, that doesn't seem to be the case for psychedelics. There are, what is it? I might be missing something. I very well could be, but that might be it. There is some experiencing bad trips. There are people doing extremely irresponsible things on LSD, like driving, for example, although that's not super common.
Drunk driving is probably way more common.
Yeah. No, I'm just thinking even among people within the population who take psychedelics, because I think, like, when speaking of setting, driving is very stressful to a lot of people, so they would immediately start feeling very bad. They're like, I don't want to do that, you know? That my conjecture, but the incidence is still low. Yeah.
You know, it's funny, my friend who was I told you about earlier, is going on in October. He had a experience with ayahuasca.
Yeah.
That's like you're there for days. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's what it is. You
Oh,
go in like a tent, and there's like a guy dancing.
Yeah,
stuff.
the shaman.
Yes, the shaman. Yes.
Yeah.
So
Very popular now.
What's wild about that story is, so I know he's had like a bad knee for like a long time. I think he had multiple snowboarding injuries.
Yeah.
And like it's a nightmare. Like it's a lot of pain all the time. Just kind of deals with it. He was saying that so like he's there and it's I won't give away the details because I want him to tell the story, but like there's this one point that kind of blew my mind a little bit where the guy's like walking by, kind of like dealing with people like individually, and he kind of like walks over to him and is like, looks like he's like fighting with something almost. Like he's like fighting, like it's it's the best way I can describe it. He's fighting with something, and finally he just kind of like does something and like sucks it in, and he just goes like, oh, like my friend now is like, what the, and like his pain in the knee was gone. So like they finish it up, and then and then so later he's like, what did you just do? Like, you did something. He was just like, oh yeah, there was like a bad spirit, and it was like really fighting me, and I finally just had to use like this thing, and I got it out of you somehow. And he had no pain for like 3 months.
Oh wow.
Now I think it's back now, but I mean, like, that's, I don't know what to say about that.
I know.
I don't know.
Well, it's similar to what I said before, and obviously it could be something completely different. I have no idea about a lot of these native traditions. I've not experienced them. They have their own thing. They've been using psychedelics for treatments and such for literally thousands of years before we started playing around with it in labs, right? So I have no idea what kind of technology they have. Technology in a sense of like techniques and stuff.
I don't know what it was.
But this is not actually uncommon. So I forgot another thing. Speaking of like mind-body connection and holding trauma in your body, one interesting study they've noted was in terms of microdosing. It's a survey of people who microdose already because they can't give it to people, right? So that's taking 1/10 to 1/20th of a dose. People who have phantom limb pain, are you familiar with that at all?
Is that like if you cut off your thumb, you can still feel it yourself?
Yeah, and it's painful.
Oh, that
yeah.
sucks.
Usually it happens when someone is in a gripped position and then they lose the limb, or muscle contracted position, lose the limb, and then they'll still feel it for years.
It's still like pain from being cut.
Yeah, where the hand was, or for example in this case if it was the hand. People who have microdosed stopped feeling phantom limb pain. So it's like,
Nuts.
I don't know. There's been other studies demonstrating women who have a particular problem with their menstrual cycle, who they bleed so much, so it's a condition where they have to go to the hospital every month to get literally blood put back in. This completely stopped. All their symptoms stopped to the severity anyway, after taking microdosing whatever substance.
Yeah. It seems to me that there definitely is some kind of, I don't know if I want to say trinity, but like there's like bodily health,
Yeah.
there's like mental health in your head,
Yeah.
and then there's like this neurological health.
Yeah.
It seems like, it just seems like, we're all focused on kind of bodily health.
Yeah.
And sort of kind of talking about mental health a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite there yet, but like this whole like releasing, that word kind of stuck with me.
Yeah.
Releasing the neurological energy, or
Yeah.
just dispersing, or
Yeah.
grounding, or whatever,
Yeah.
the word used. But like, that was interesting to me, that like your nerves also kind of maybe can hold on to, not like a memory, but like they're just always contracted, I guess.
Yeah.
Or always kind
Mhm.
of acting almost like they themselves are kind of alive in a sense,
Yeah.
where they're reacting a certain way from something happening, and then you can actually medicate that and get rid of that,
Yeah.
and now it resets itself almost.
Yeah, it's his discharge. So, what's interesting, I think one of the easiest ways for someone to understand what the discharge means is if you've ever had a good cry. That's one of the few ways we can physiologically discharge, is you whatever something happens, you have a good cry, and then you kind of, this is a weird question, have you ever cried before?
Yes, I've had only one time, obviously.
Wow, Steve, kudos to you, sir. No, I'm just kidding.
No, when you just,
Yeah.
when you like have that uncontrollable, like,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
like afterwards you're just like,
Yeah.
like you feel
Yeah.
good after that.
That's a physiological way your body was dealing with that stress from a neurological level. So it was discharging. And of course it's exhausting, but it's exhausting in comparison to holding on to that
Yeah, if you hold it in.
for days and days,
Yeah.
building. Imagine that would be not dissimilar from trauma, except by magnitude of like 10, 20, whatever the trauma may have happened or what it did and how early it happened to you. So that's essentially trauma in a nutshell.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's nuts, man.
Yeah.
Well, getting a little late.
Yeah.
I don't know how much. Let's see. Hold on. Let's show something. 4:03. All right. Should we wrap it up?
Yeah. Could I mention one last
Absolutely,
thing?
dude.
Just going back to the
I was gonna say final thoughts.
yeah, thank you. Just going back to the whole thing about race, slavery,
Oh,
trauma,
sure,
stuff
yeah.
like that, just because I've been thinking about this a lot recently.
Me too.
I've been studying a lot about it. And you asked, like, what are some treatments for it? And psychedelics are, of course, great. I'm a huge proponent. But I have to believe that a big part of it is not just like a culture change, like a change that we view trauma and how visible it is, but also how we view resources in a lot of ways. Like I said, in the school I'm currently interning at, my gosh, it's like money isn't everything, but man, could it help, especially a lot of these kids. So I'm not proposing any specific policy, but for sure, man, if somehow these kids could get money, that would be ideal. Not like, I think in a lot of ways people might say like a
Welfare.
welfare handout or something like that,
Yep.
because a lot of these kids are on welfare and they're still working their ass off and they still they're struggling, you know what I mean? And it's really heartbreaking to see when like something you take for granted, like being able to just like work your job and that's like enough, and then you can go home, or like going to high school without having to work and not having to support your own family. Like, it's, of course, like you could do it, but it becomes a matter of like, if this is a barrier in the way of someone just being the best contributor to our society that we can, I think it behooves us to find a way to address it in a meaningful way. If not in money, then resources, something.
Yeah, I agree entirely. In fact,
Yeah.
I would say not even just money and
Yeah.
resources, but like people,
Yeah,
community. There used
Yes.
to be, it wasn't that long ago that we had this idea of a community where people in communities took care of each other. You knew your
Absolutely.
neighbors, you knew your neighbors' kids,
Yeah.
you knew what people were up to and everything.
Absolutely.
People, again, going to church I
Yes.
mean, when I started going to church more regularly, and I got involved, and you see the work that they're doing there.
Right.
You know, it doesn't make sense to me that churches get the bad rap they do. Now, granted,
Oh,
there
yeah.
are obviously bad churches
course,
out
of
there.
course, yeah.
You know, but I would say by and large, right, to put money on it, I think
agree.
most churches are doing all the stuff that always people say other people should do. They go,
Yep.
you know, kind of like you said, there are people that would say, we should help these people, they need more money, and they go home, and what do they do with their money?
Yeah.
What do they do with their time?
Yep.
Nothing.
Amen.
They want other people to do it, or better yet, they want a government to do it for them. And
Yes.
now, I'm not even opposed to that.
Right.
Well, except federal level, but that's the constitutionalist in me. But
Right,
like,
right.
we have state and local governments
Yeah.
that have money as well.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not going to rely on yourself, that
Yeah.
being the community, the people, go to your state legislatures, go to your local government, you know, down the road from you. Talk to these guys. Let's you know,
Yeah, totally.
it's not impossible. In fact, the group that I was in last fall now, I think it was. Or was it winter? Spring. It was spring, sorry.
Yeah.
This spring. You know, it was brought to our attention that a friend of a friend was in need, and so we mobilized. And
Oh, that's amazing.
without anyone else telling us what we should do,
Yeah.
we ended up filling a need that a school had. It was doing a
Oh, dude, that's fantastic.
yeah, like, you know, it was a
Yeah.
lunch program. Like, they'll put, like, you know,
Yeah.
kids go to recess, they like put food in the backpack so like no one knows,
Yeah.
no judgment,
Right,
but the
right.
kid like can go home and eat that night.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And it's like we
Yeah.
did it ourselves.
That's totally another thing that's underestimated, just to think like, wow, you have to ask, are these kids eating today?
Yeah.
Are they coming home hungry after working multiple shifts and then they still don't have enough to like eat?
Yeah, and it's like, you know, and like, so the person, not saying you, but the person
Yeah.
that would, you know, the guy that we just mentioned who would, we need to do this, and goes away and does nothing.
Yeah.
I'm not condemning him. Like,
Right.
he has good intentions. Follow him through.
Yeah.
See it through. Don't just
Ugh.
stop at the good intention.
I'm proud of you, Steve. That really bothers me.
Me too.
That's another time where I need to build my compassion, like with my girlfriend. There's another situation where I'm like, oh, because I agree with you. I think churches often do so much for the community, and
They don't take enough credit for it.
They may not be perfect institutions. They may have problems, and of course address those problems, but don't take away the good that they do. Don't take away the benefit to the communities they do, because they've done a lot. Speaking of racism, one of the few safe places historically black people have had was the church.
Oh, even today they're among some of the most religious people, I think.
So it's just like very hard to throw out the baby with the bathwater when you've seen the benefit that's happened, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just think, like you said, money is one thing, and that would be great. But like, you know, even better for like someone like maybe, I don't know, came and took the kid out. I mean, what was that program? The Big Brothers, Big Sisters thing.
Yeah, mentors
Like,
are huge.
I mean, I mean that's even better because now you get the resources, but now you kind of get a role model.
That's,
you know, if you're not
that
getting
is
it at home,
huge. Yes,
it's like
absolutely.
And you know,
That's another factor of success that is often underestimated. Cannot remember the statistic either, but it's something about if you have an adult role model that is not your parent, your chances of academic success goes like through the roof.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm trying to remember if I saw that. It might have been a statistic. It might have just been something I'm just fabricating in my head from other information. But yeah, like if you didn't have like a father, you would go to like the guy across the hall who was like, you know, an older, you know, retired guy, and you just go hang out with him. And like he didn't become your dad, but like he was your role model.
Yeah.
You know, I know some friends of mine had this one. It's a wild situation. There's this guy. He has these two girls, and they are, you know, it wasn't planned and everything, and the mother is not in the picture. It's a long, whole, horrible, terrible story. Yeah. But so now the two friends are basically kind of like raising these two girls, and they're just God bless them, really. They're so sweet. They're so nice, and it's like, you know, they're just I don't know where they would be without these two friends that are kind of like, you know, they're here's my, and then, you know, they bring to their family. You know, the father comes in, you know, the co-parent's father, I guess, is like, oh, come here, kisses, and I'm just like, oh God, thank you, like they need this so bad.
Yeah, it's a huge difference, literally changing lives.
Yeah, and it's like that's, to me, it's like money is one thing, but I think the personal relationship with another responsible, moral person, like that is more important to me than anything else. Yeah. The money, I mean, sure, and I guess it definitely helps. Not definitely helps. Yeah. But I think there's better ways to do it. And I think that instead of pointing fingers and saying, oh, we need to individually take that responsibility and go make sure our neighbors and everyone's okay. And just do what we can.
Yes, totally.
I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, we'll do it again.
Yeah, it was fun.
All right, till next time.
Till next time.